All right, so we are really excited for today's Wonderful Works Talks. We're going to be talking about something that's really important when it comes to disability in the family. That's dads. And today we have with us writer, speaker, and disability advocate John Felageller, Al Feria, who is a disability ministry catalyst from One Collective, and Rich Gathro, who has a long career in nonprofit and higher education leadership. And one more thing that's great about these guys is they are all dads to children who have disabilities and are part of the Special Fathers Network. So we are really excited to have them today. We're going to be taking a look at the importance role of the father and why it matters for dads to be connecting with other dads. Al, would you tell us a little bit about the Special Fathers Network?
The Special Fathers Network was begun by someone named David Hirsch, who had a burden to keep families together to avoid fatherlessness. And one of the groups that he saw was special needs families. We are all part of a group, a mastermind group on Wednesday nights. We're the first one of the Special Fathers Network. We're kind of a test group this year. So I've never been in the same room with these guys before, but we have some pretty deep sharing on Wednesday nights. And I've really appreciated Rich and John in that group.
Well, we are absolutely thrilled you guys are here, and I think this is going to be really impactful for dads everywhere.
I have 4 children. My oldest is 19, just went off to South Dakota to college. And I have an 18-year-old in Boston now. And John is our youngest. We knew something was different with him than our other 3. We weren't quite sure what. We were missionaries in France as well, and the French didn't seem to know what autism was, or they blamed the mother for that and tried to psychoanalyze the mom. We happened to be back in the US for, we thought was 2 months in 2014, visiting churches and stuff. We were able to get an appointment with a pediatric neurologist in New Jersey, and in 20 minutes she gave us a diagnosis of autism, and we didn't know what that was. So some friends did research for us, and we found out that our son, he was less than 3, he really needed early intervention. So all of a sudden our 2 months in America became a year initially to get him into early intervention. We were missionaries, and that got taken away, the France part of that. But then in seeing, I was really frustrated and angry.
Can I ask you a question about that real quick?
Yes.
So when I listened to your podcast with the Dad to Dad podcast, what really came through was your love for France, as you really love France and love living there. And I gotta admit, I got a little misty, because what came through even more was, more than you loved France, you loved your family. And so you chose to sacrifice living in France, where you loved, to go to the States for what was right for your family. I think there's a lot of men out there now who are raising children with disabilities who find themselves in similar positions, where maybe what the dream they thought they have is in conflict with what is best for their family. What did you learn from that experience that you want them to know?
Yeah, that's, I was wrestling with that question a lot. We had just gotten this golden opportunity, it seemed like, to work with this really exciting church in Paris and do some really cool stuff. And then all of a sudden that was gone. And I knew it was the right thing to do, to stay in America, at least for a year, and kind of see, but I didn't want to do it. But we have to make the right choices, I think. And it seemed like that was an obvious call, that we need to stay in America. During that year, first year back, I just started exploring disability options, like what was available. There didn't seem to be too much at that time. Since then, I've explored a lot and discovered quite a bit. But I learned the challenges of families, and I started asking God, instead of being angry about having to leave, I said, well, okay, So we're here. So what am I going to do about it?
Mm-hmm.
And that change in mindset really led me to start exploring and connecting. In France, we did a lot of connecting with different ministries and all that. So just kind of using that approach with disability and meeting all sorts of people with different organizations and just discovering more and more. I've made that my job with my mission organization. They eventually let me go with it. And I'm considered the specialist in disability with One Collective. Being able to connect different workers and different opportunities. So our son, I say, our 10-year-old, he's had a lot more influence than most 10-year-olds have because of me getting to connect and meet different people and try to build bridges between organizations and projects and see what God has.
Yeah. So you found out when you left, I think you had said before, you kind of found out you had a season there, and then you were moving on into the next season, and it opened up a whole, probably things you never even knew that were coming. Is that fair to say?
Absolutely. Yeah. I remember like a year ago, I was thinking about everyone I saw during this one day or week or something like that. And it was all people I didn't know before we ended up back in the States. And so just, God opened up a whole new world. And I wouldn't have picked disability. I mean, honestly, but he puts us in situations sometimes that we wouldn't have chosen. And we have to decide what we're going to do about that. And, Paul got stuck on Malta, his shipwreck, on the shipwreck. And out of that, a whole lot of good stuff happened. So, nothing's an accident, I believe. And if God puts us through cancer or through other things, and things we don't want to be in, it's not an accident. And he can use, special needs children or other stuff to get us where he wants us to be.
Yeah. Yeah. Because he's always there. He never leaves us, no matter what. Yeah. And I also heard in your story that you and your wife, Nicole, before having your son, did not have experience with disability. You found yourself in a really great special needs ministry at your church that you went to. What difference did that special needs ministry make in your life? And how different would your guys' life look today if that church had said, no, we don't want to do this. It's too hard.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, we ended up, I'd heard of this church before we ended up back in New Jersey. And after we were there, they talked about this project they were going to do to expand. And one of the areas of expansion was disability. And so they were hiring on all their campuses a special needs coordinator. And that really helped us confirm that was the right place for us at that time. And it's been helpful with our son having a buddy on Sundays and sport nights and, parents' nights out. It certainly would have been a lot harder without that church intentionally reaching out.
So you are now connecting with other dads and a part of this mentoring. Can you speak a little bit about what that's been like, connecting with other fathers?
Yeah. The Special Fathers Network's been really good because there's experts in all sorts of different areas that are on these webinars and things like that. Just knowing there's a pool of people and an organization that has these podcasts and things like that is helpful. And then there's also movement for dads too, I think. Like Johnny and Friends in Pennsylvania, they are just starting a dad's group next month. They've had a mom's group for a while, but that's something really cool, I think, that they're doing. And hopefully there's more of that happening in other places as well. I think it's going to bubble up. I think it has to, because there's such a need for supporting fathers with disabilities. So I hope in this next season, that's going to bubble up in a lot of different places around the U.S. I'm actually meeting with a guy from Japan through the Special Fathers Network next week. And he wanted to talk over some stuff. So I'm not quite sure what we're going to talk over, but that could be a dad thing, how to help that happen as well.
That's great. And can you tell us a little bit about your son and what gifts you have gotten through being his father?
Yeah, John is 10. He's nonverbal, or not speaking, I guess is how they're supposed to say it, not nonverbal, because he communicates. And he's also intellectually delayed. So I like to bring him to this cafe in New Jersey. It's called Ethan and the Bean. It was started by a special needs mom. And yeah, John has his place there. I bring him in as much as I brought him in every day this past week because he was home for school. So we went in every day, and just seeing him go in and find his place on the wall, and he knows different people there and things like that. He's a very happy kid. He's very communicative without speaking. And so John brings joy wherever he goes. And so it's cool, a 10-year-old, nonverbal, but has a presence. And I was communicating with one of his speech therapists at a school before he was in, and she said she was talking to another one at his new school, and she was saying how lucky the new school was to have John and things like that. So over time, I've seen people, talk about John, as John, and that's been cool. Not as a kid with disabilities, but just as John. And we'll see how he develops. But he brings a lot of joy into our house and levity and things like that. So he's just a lot of fun to have around and to hang out with.
That's awesome. Well, thank you for sharing.
So I'm John Felageller, and I'm coming to you from very chilly northern Illinois. I guess that's the case in a lot of places now. And my day job is I'm actually a special ed teacher in downtown Chicago, but I am also a special needs dad, obviously. I have one son, Chris, who's 14, who is autistic nonverbal. I'm also a divorced dad. So I'm actually, one of the unfortunate casualties of that dynamic as well. I'm a proud Midwesterner, Chicagoan, born and raised. I was raised in a very, very typical blue-collar Chicago working-class home. Every joke or whatever you've ever heard about people from Chicago, that was my family kind of thing. And, the thing that I learned from my own father was really, as I like to, unfortunately, kid, I learned more about what not to do. Because although my dad was a guy who worked every day and was always home at night, he just wasn't involved. He wasn't a guy who would really put his arm around you. He would talk at you, but not to you or with you, kind of a thing. And that really, what I took from that was, okay, I knew that I didn't want to be my dad. In terms of my own experience as a father, and Chris is my only son as well. What I saw and what I learned was that, being a parent is difficult enough. Being a special needs parent is even harder. But specifically, the role that dads play is also equally challenging, because what I experience, and I think what a lot of guys experience, is usually what happens is that if you've got a strong family, you've got strong parents, and my wife is an excellent mother to my child, always has been. But, she really kind of jumped right in there, took over things, and was really a type A personality. And she did a great job and still does. But a lot of times the dad is kind of pushed to the side, whether intentionally or not. And many times men throw themselves into their career and make sure that all the bills are paid and, the kid has everything that he needs. In my case, I never made that much money as a teacher to be able to say that's all on me either. So I really had to figure out, what do I do? Who am I? What really is my role, and how do I give back to my child? So I really learned that early on in his childhood in terms of the ways that I interacted and spent time with him. And reflecting on the things that I didn't get from my father as well, but then also giving back and getting into volunteerism and advocacy and getting involved with organizations such as Special Fathers Network, and as well as a bunch of different disability ministries around the country doing all kinds of things. And my message really is this: is that men are kind of silently suffering in a lot of ways, because again, you may love your kids and you may love your family, but you don't always know how to show up. And unfortunately, the divorce rate is so high, and I can personally speak to that, because many times men get lost in the relationship, they get lost in the marriage, and in terms of the roles, which unfortunately don't seem to be that defined anymore. So that is really what I love to speak to. I love speaking to special needs parents and families, but specifically the dads, who I think really need a lot of support.
Yeah. So on that, John, you're talking about the special challenges of a father in this situation. How is that different for a father typically than it is for a mother?
Well, I think what usually is the case is that most men, in a very generic sense, aren't always good about connecting with their feelings. Now, I can tell you that I can count many guys who are great about being in touch with their feelings and sharing those. And there's two guys right here on this call with me, certainly. But the fact is that a lot of times men don't know how to show up because, again, the expectation that you have for your child and what that's going to look like. Every guy has a dream that his kid is going to grow up and play sports, or at the very least, they're going to go to their little league games or travel baseball or whatever. Or, if those are academic things, just like moms have dreams for their kids as well. And a lot of times when those are dashed and a father doesn't exactly know how to interact with the child, then they also don't know, there's a little bit of a gap there between their relationship with the child. And then that further grows in terms of the family as a whole and also the marriage. And unfortunately, it's a conversation that really never gets had because for the most part, you're in survival mode, right? And the moms jump in and it's the autism mama bear conversation, and they jump in and they take over and it's taking care of the kid, but there's no self-care for mom and dad as individuals and then in terms of the marriage. So a lot of times what happens is, unfortunately, mom has to be the one to speak to these things. Hey, I think we need to go to counseling. Hey, I think we need to spend more time together. Hey, I think we need to talk about this. And dads really aren't finding a space to either, whether not feeling included or not being the catalyst for that. So I think for the moms out there and for the women, it's kind of allowing that door to be open. You don't have to force it open. You don't even have to open it all the way. But, you want to at least have those little conversations to say, hey, you know what? I think you're a great dad. I think you're doing a great job with this and that. Are there some other ways you want to be involved? Are there some other things on your mind? Are there some things that, you're frustrated with and maybe you have a hard time sharing because, either you're coming from the standpoint of I'll just suck it up and keep moving on, or nobody's going to listen to me. You want to make sure that the men are being heard too, because they do need to be heard. They may not admit it, freely kind of a thing, but it is important to them as well.
Yeah. Do you believe that just because a father isn't showing his feelings, that doesn't mean that he isn't really feeling them deep inside, and that maybe that's something that we all need to be aware of?
Absolutely. Men have feelings. They have them. They use them. They feel them. Here's the issue. It's a bigger cultural conversation, and you could spend hours on that. But the fact is that men don't always know how to communicate their feelings. It's just not as natural in terms of women being able to do it. As I like to joke, I run a small special needs dad support group in my town, and it's like maybe 10 guys, and it's hard enough to get those 10 guys together, let alone share their feelings. But you put a bunch of women in a room, they don't know each other, stick a bottle of wine in the middle of the table, by the end of the night they're best friends.
Right.
Because it's just a natural thing.
Right.
And so men need to feel safe. But also that safety is also based on, I don't want to embarrass myself because I'm a guy. I'm not embarrassing myself by saying I'm sad or I'm hurt or I was crying. And there are a lot of men out there, even if they are sensitive enough to admit that, they're still insecure to know, okay, is this a safe space? Can I talk to this guy? What exactly does it look like for me? So it's really helping to define what that is. What is that safe space? Is it just, that time you spend with your spouse? Is it maybe going out with a close buddy or two, whether they're a special needs dad or not? Is it being part of a bigger organization like Special Fathers Network, where, like Al said, on Wednesdays, we meet and we exactly do that. And the bottom line is that, I can tell you that I knew some of the guys in our group before we started meeting. I didn't know all of them, and I certainly didn't know them to the point I do now. But again, it's kind of defining what that safe space is and then allowing the dad to say, hey, it's okay. Share as much or as little as you want, but the offer is there, and, kind of take it as you're comfortable.
So I did have a chance to watch the Dad to Dad podcast with all three of these fellas before this interview, and we will post those links on our Facebook group. But with that, John, in your story, I saw that there were some times that in the beginning that you had kind of gotten into a dark place because the challenges of raising your son felt overwhelming. Can you tell us what helped turn that around for you?
So I like to tell a story of two parking lots, and I'll try to get this in as quick as I can. So in 2012, I was at the end of my rope, and everything kind of percolated to the boiling point We were having marital issues, financial issues. We had a bunch of questions and uncertainties about our son. And I am not, and as I shared in the Dad to Dad podcast, that I'm not ashamed to say, I did get to the point where I had written 3 letters, one to my wife, one to my mother, and one to my son, and they were all suicide notes. Mm-hmm. Now, here's the thing. I'm still here, obviously, yes. And I never tried anything. Yeah. But I got to the point where I said, maybe this is where this is going to go. Now, what's funny is that my ex-wife and I, we weren't actually Christians when we were first married. Mm-hmm. I was raised Catholic; she was raised Jewish, actually. But we came to Christ, we came to Christianity through these struggles. And I remember that there was a men's group that I belonged to, and I remember that prior to going to a men's group one night in the summer of 2012, I was out in the parking lot and I was calling a couple of my oldest friends, telling them everything I was going through, trying to get some advice, and they were kind of like, I got nothing for it. Like, this is what you're describing to me is like, I have no advice for you. I don't even know where to begin. And so I went into this men's group thinking, well, here's a men's group. They're mostly older guys. Maybe they've been down the road. Maybe they can give me some advice, etc. And when I shared my story, they all looked kind of dumbfounded, and they were like, geez, that's really tough, but you'll get through it. And I'm thinking to myself, what kind of advice is that, right? Yeah. I mean, it's easy advice, but it wasn't what I needed to hear. Yeah. And what's interesting is that following that began my slow progression through getting better, getting help, getting support, mainly through church, because the cool thing is I wound up joining a real men's Bible study group that actually changed my life in many ways. That's where a lot of that support came from. But what was funny is that over the course of the next 7 years or so, developing relationships and meeting with men and getting help and getting support and going to counseling and doing all of these things. In November of 2019, when my now ex-wife handed me divorce papers totally out of the blue, I wound up just driving because I needed to clear my head, and I just went to a nearby parking lot and sat. And the interesting thing about that parking lot experience was 7 years later, I had 1 million resources. I had 1 million people I could call. I had all kind of men that could speak into my life from a variety of places, but certainly the special needs world. Yeah. So the important thing there is to remember that, you never know when you're going to need that help. It doesn't need to be 1 million guys. It could be 1, it could be 3, but you need those guys to pull on when the times are really hard. And they may not exactly have an answer to your question, but they're empathic enough and they know you well enough and you trust them enough to at least be able to share. And that's the important thing about that community piece. I always like to emphasize the faith is important. That's my foundation. But the community is also what gets you through to the next day as well.
So how exactly did your men's group change your life?
In terms of what changed my life was, one, those guys were willing to listen to me even though they didn't know me. And a very powerful thing that happened at the end of that meeting was they closed in prayer. And a guy I just met 2 hours ago, he prayed for me with the group and to the group and to God. And that changed my life right there because I knew the power of that. I could feel that. And I left that room that night a changed man. And, as I like to say, people, especially friends who aren't Christian like to kid me, you and that Jesus stuff. I'm like, well, that Jesus stuff is all I got, let me tell you. Yeah. So, that has really become the rock that I rest on and land on. And again, we defined ourselves as a Christian couple. My wife came to Christ as well, but that didn't stop us from winding up in divorce. It doesn't mean you're broken, and it doesn't mean God's abandoned you. It just means there's more to the story, and you just have to hang around to see how it unfolds.
Yeah. Do you have any advice for other single dads that are raising kids with disabilities?
You need support more than anyone, because the issue is that it's hard enough when you're married doing it, or especially if you have other kids, whether they're typical or not. But when you have a special needs kid with, all of those things going on, make sure that you're doing the self-care. Make sure that you've got someone to call out to. It might be, I'm losing my mind. Let me just step out of the room and call somebody for 10 minutes. You need the support more than anyone. And that's the other thing that I also just want to throw in there too. I think that unfortunately in our culture, we have kind of allowed, when we think of divorce, we think of, the poor, struggling single mom. Well, any single parent is a struggling single parent, whether they're the mom or the dad. No child really deserves or needs to go through life in the product of divorce. And it's great if mom and dad are involved, and certainly in our case, that's what's happening. But really, it's not what any of that was meant to be, and we certainly know that from a faith perspective as well. So you really need the support and help, and please make sure that you're going out and getting it. If nothing else, definitely the self-care for yourself and getting that space and time, but also making sure you've got the support network, when you need it.
Yeah. So I know part of getting that support is being willing to be vulnerable, which I think is a lot harder for men typically than it is for women. So why do you think that being vulnerable as a man is actually a courageous thing to do?
Well, if we come at it from a faith perspective, okay, and I think we can come at it from a couple of different vantage points. There's a term that I learned early on in my walk as a Christian, which is servant leadership. Before he left this earth, what did Jesus do at the Last Supper? He washed his disciples' feet. And he said, if you don't, and he said this to Peter, if you don't do this, you'll have no share with me. The master has to become the servant. And so in that sense, you have to remember that vulnerability is strength. First of all, because you are acknowledging what you have going on. You're also acknowledging that the world outside of you, including your job, your kids, family, whatever, is bigger than you. And, you have to get to a place of lowliness to kind of understand, okay, look, I understand who I am. I know what my strengths are. I understand what I'm struggling with. I understand where and how to ask for help. And also, again, from a faith perspective, it's the knowing that, this is too much for me. And, I'm going to quote my friend Doc Hunsley from Source Special Needs in Kansas City here, when he always, when people throw around the line, well, God doesn't give you any more than you can handle. Well, that's actually a big lie. God does give you more than you can handle so that you can learn to depend on Him.
Yes,
right?
Absolutely.
You have to be forced to ask for help. We don't like to ask for help, especially men, especially stubborn.
Right.
Everybody needs help.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. One last question for you is, can you tell us a little bit about where you are in your life now and how you have used these experiences in a brand new way?
Well, I like to think that, as tough as the last couple of years have been, certainly with divorce and COVID and just the whole bunch of life changes, I just like to think it's more material for the story, right? And at the end of the day, it's more glory to God,
Yeah.
So, what I like to do is I like to share my story as an example to say, hey guys, you had a messed up childhood, so did I. You're the product of a divorce, so am I. You've got a special needs kid, so do I. You've had to ask for help, from people on a variety of levels, so have I. So, I love to share those stories again in writing and speaking.
I have two children. I've been married 44 years, have two children. My son with cerebral palsy is pushing 37. My daughter, who has a variety of neurological issues stemming from a childhood brain tumor and subsequent stroke, she's 32 and lives in Georgia and is married, provided for us a grandson. Will is amazing. He was diagnosed to be nothing more than a vegetable, but he speaks through an iPad, and he can move about with a severe limp, but move about. He's proven all the statistics wrong, and taught me so much. When he was first diagnosed, my first words were, "You mean I won't ever get to see my son play little league?" We fathers kind of have this thing about our daughters are princess and our sons we're going to have some vicarious experiences through. And I'll never forget the first day I coached his Little League team. We created a challenger division in the Little League in our county and created our own teams, and the joy on his face. And I carry his baseball card in my wallet as a reminder that I did get to see him play Little League.
Yeah. What was that like, Rich? That moment that you saw him for the first time in his Little League uniform coming up to the plate? What did that mean to you? And when you look back on when he was diagnosed and what you were told, what would you tell other fathers who are getting that diagnosis right now?
Number one, children defy the statistics all the time. Mm-hmm. Again, we have to be very careful about our expectations. But fortunately, we did have people who had disabled children early on say to us, mm-hmm. you got to push. Mm-hmm. Don't be lazy. You got to push your kids. Mm-hmm. Obviously, you can't push them beyond what they're able to do, but do push and inspire them. And this boy was such an inspiration. And our daughter too. Our daughter's an overcomer as well. And we human beings created in God's image are overcomers. Now, I spent most of my adult life in Washington, D.C. Mm-hmm. New York's about money. Washington, D.C. is about power and prestige and so forth. And I was guilty of certain expectations of what my children would be like, right. Which, turned out to be a little different than my desire to control. My children taught me what it means to be an image bearer. Again, in Washington, D.C., where I was for 40 years, mm-hmm. so much is about prestige and power and position. Yeah. And my son taught me image bearing. I worked on Capitol Hill, and I noticed a change in me after Will, where I ignored all the street people. After Will came into my life, I knew them by name. Wow. They were friends. Wow. In fact, I drove my office crazy because I was always inviting them in for breakfast and things. Yeah. But the what he taught me about image bearing, every human is an image bearer. And I can't overemphasize enough how important it is that a church mm-hmm. adopts your children. Yeah. And we were fortunate that we had that. I don't know what we would have done without our church.
Yeah, I agree. And I think kind of what some of you have already mentioned, they're not adopting your children as children with disabilities. They are just adopting your children as the children that they are. Yep. That is one thing. My brother has autism. I've been around people with disabilities my whole life. I know so many people, and they're not people with disabilities. They're just people. And that's kind of what you learned. Is that what you're saying after Will, that you learned to really value each and every person that you saw? Is that
Absolutely.
What I'm hearing?
Absolutely. And Will taught me to take my identity to my work rather than from my work.
Oh, I like that.
We males suffer testosterone poisoning, and we have these ego things, and there's my son's humbled me in a lot of ways with his mm-hmm. spirit and everything else, and I discovered how important it was to take my identity to what I did rather than from what I did, or to my performance of my children or whatever. I'm very grateful. I have been blessed with a wife that holds me accountable, mm-hmm. holds me very accountable, and has pushed me for 44 years mm-hmm. to access the right side of my brain where the mm-hmm. emotions are rather than just the left side of my brain. Yeah. And I think God's given us those two sides of brains and wants them integrated. The logical, here's how to do it side with the creative, emotional side for a whole brain. We need to be whole brain people, And I learned very quickly that your children need to know that you see them, that you see them. You look them in the eye and see them. We're born wanting to be seen and known, as a psychiatrist, Kurt Thompson, talks about. And your children long for that, and it makes them secure.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I love that. You had said, I think your favorite quote is that life is 99% relationships and the rest is just details. Can you speak on to why you chose that as your life motto?
Because I discovered it along the way, really. What would I do without the relationships that help carry us? And, Al was talking about there are no accidents. I mean, you see, as you know, I'm the old guy of the bunch here.
Mhm.
You get to look back on your life, as I do it now at my age, and see the key role of relationships that have come my way by just paying attention. So much, by the way, so much of God's will is just, it's in front of your nose. You just have to pay attention.
Yeah.
And how people have opened doors and held me accountable, borne my burdens. It really, I had a lifelong friend who would sign his emails to me, "Your forever friend."
Mm-hmm.
And this is just a taste of what eternity is going to be like.
Mm-hmm.
Just a taste.
Mm-hmm.
And open up, people. You don't have to be a blubbering, emotional guy, but we males need to recognize how powerful friendship is,
Mm-hmm.
and how much better off we are for that. And your real wealth is found in friendship. It really is.
Yeah, I agree. How important is a faith community for families affected by disability?
John has it absolutely correct. What he emphasized, the importance of both faith and community.
Yes.
And the fact that that's a crazy statement, that God won't send anything our way we can't handle. We never would have been able to handle our situation without our community, our faith, particularly our small, what we called covenant group within our congregation.
Mm-hmm.
One of those couples became what we called covenant parents to our children. And they had 3 highly successful, strapping boys but they were amazing because of how they adopted our children and trained their boys to embrace our children. Very important, particularly my son looked to these older boys. And I'll never forget when they were renovating their house, the contractor asked, how high do you want this banister to get to the basement? And the boys all said, well, we want it just the right height for Will to be able to get down the stairs.
So looking back on your life now, because your kids are adults, what do you wish you would have known when you were first starting this journey that you have learned?
Well, I'm glad there's some things I didn't know. Starting it out, I wish I'd known how true Psalm 91 is, that we live in the shadow of the Almighty. And and Psalm 34, how God hears our cry. He does hear our cry. Like the people, in Exodus 3, he says to the people of Israel, I hear your cry. I hear you, and I'm here, and I'm gonna respond. I see your suffering. And there have been points of times where my suffering's been so great. One point where I was a new president had come in my company, and he told me that he was going to do most things I was doing. He didn't know what he was going to do with me, and so forth. So I thought, well, I'm going to lose my job, and I'm over in Oxford, England, at the university, and I got on my knees and I just, how am I? I've got these kids with disabilities. How am I going to pay this freaking mortgage and all these medical bills? There was a thing then called pre-existing conditions, where I had $40,000 hospital bills, and thankfully that's been changed. And I was reading Psalm 34 again, and I heard we need to stop and listen. God is always speaking, even though we have a lot of wax in our ears. God is always speaking, and I heard him say, have I ever left you? Have I ever deserted you? This is found in Hebrews. What he said, I heard God say, "What do you think? What makes you think I will now?" I returned back to the States and was offered the best job of my life.
Wow.
So now that's a nice happy ending, and
yeah,
there are a lot of times that there aren't happy endings.
Right.
I'm not naive.
right.
But
God's always there those times too. Right?
Yeah, exactly. And we just need to, again, pay attention and not be afraid to lean into our friends, our companions. John referred to the last night Jesus was with his disciples. If you would ask me if I had one prayer today for God's people, is that John 13:34 would break out. That is where Jesus says, "By this is how people will know you, by your love for each other." If that could really break out in the church, instead of all this dumping on each other about theological issues and differences, particularly these days, the political issues, we could just humble ourselves and be in love with each other. What would that say to the world? So I want John 13:34. That's the pandemic I want in the church.
I agree 100%. So I have a question for each of you. If you could speak to fathers today that are watching this, one thing you really want them to know.
I would say be brave and have the courage of knowing that you are loved. And really to Rich's point about, God never abandoning you. You're not alone. I can't tell you personally over these last couple of years with everything that I've experienced, in terms of different things, how alone I felt sometimes. Just legitimately, like where did everybody go? Where is everybody? And the reality is that there are seasons of life, right? God intentionally takes us through valleys to get us to some higher places. Only God knows that sometimes the best way and the most necessary way to get you through somewhere is through the valley. So you have to remember that even in the places where you feel the most alone, you're never alone. You might need to, actually initiate some conversation. If you're in a place where you have quiet time and a quiet space, well, use that. That's a gift, right? And if you're really feeling like you need the human companionship, go find that too. Get your support network. That's why it's so necessary. It doesn't mean that you spend every hour of every day with them, or texting them nonstop. It just means that they're there when you really need them, when you need the companionship and the time together. But, also embrace what's right in front of you, because the other thing that I've learned in life is this: every day is a gift. Every experience is a gift. I can't tell you that even looking back now at some of the darkest times, there was still something about it that I could say, wow, I really like that. I remember that I really enjoyed doing that, or whatever the experience was, or the people maybe you don't see anymore. There's always something to be grateful for. And believe it or not, as tough as your day might be today, 5 years from now, you might say, wow, you know what? I really wish I could go back those 5 years, because I really like that part. The rest of it, I don't know. But you know what? There's always something to be grateful for, and embrace that, and be thankful and be grateful. Very important. Be grateful every day for everything.
Yeah. Good. My son is signaling me I need to take him to therapy.
Okay.
But I would say when we live outside our comfort zone, we're really alive. And you are about to live a life outside your comfort zone, and you will be really alive. That would be my first words, because my children have seen that I've never been allowed to live in a comfort zone. so I need to run.
Well, thank you for joining us, Rich.
Good to be with all of you. And we'll see you gentlemen Wednesday night.
All right.
Okay. Take care.
Bye. Try to find older dads or dads that have gone through before you what you're going through. Even like Rich in our group on Wednesday night, he's like the sage in our group. He kind of helps as different people share challenges. He brings a assurance and a calmness to the group that it'll be okay. One way or another, it'll work out. And as a new special needs dad, I didn't know that. Unfortunately, I found other dads that were there, but and sometimes someone will contact me saying, "Can you talk to this dad? He's a new special needs dad," and I'm happy to do that. And it's more listening than anything, but just kind of saying it'll work out. And I'm still working out myself. John and I have younger kids, so we're still going through a lot of the stuff ourselves. But having the perspective of older parents that have gone through it is quite assuring that it'll work out.